see you guys. It's a small crowd tonight. Feels so intimate, which is great because it's a lot of fun when it's smaller groups of people. We have been in the book of Hebrews since September. I can't believe that. Like since September, we've been in the book of Hebrews. So if you haven't been with us, we've had quite the journey. And we're going to keep working through. Next week will be the first week in December, so it's a first focus prayer night, and then we'll have two more after that will cover the rest of the book. So we'll do 11 and then 12, 13 to wrap it up. So lots of fun in this book. I do feel like I've had to do the most work I've ever had to do in any of the books that we've studied, because Hebrews has not been one that I've studied a lot, like in my history. I always tell people, like, the Gospels are like my jam. Like, we can do the Gospels, and then like Philippians, Ephesians, Colossians, and then give me the Old Testament. Like, I come alive in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, like Numbers. Give me all the Pentateuch. It's funny, I'm teaching high schoolers Bible right now. I swear to you, it's like the greatest joy in my life right now. I'm having so much fun teaching through the Old Testament, because I really love the Old Testament. And I'm saying that because a lot of times we don't love the Old Testament. And that is a huge problem if you read the book of Hebrews, because the whole book is just giant references to the Old Testament. There's basically like not a sentence, it feels like it's not some referent moment to the Old Testament. And so I want to do like a little recap as we get into Hebrews 10 tonight. And then we're going to talk about two big ideas: forgiveness and forbearance, for kind of like what this chapter is about. But I want to just highlight a few things for our recap. So at the very beginning of the book, it's this beautiful book. We don't know who wrote it, which is super fun. I think it's super fun that we don't know who wrote it. There's a mystery involved from the very beginning. But in chapter 1, what we get more than anything else is that over time, God, in the First Testament or the Old Testament, God has spoken to us through all sorts of ways. So he gave them the commandments, the prophets spoke. There were all these different ways God spoke. But then, fast forward into the Second Testament or the New Testament, and it says that God has spoken to us by his Son. And so this is like the core foundation of everything in Hebrews. It's all about the Son. It's all about Jesus and how God speaks through the Son. That's super significant because without the Word of God, the Son, we don't get creation, we don't get salvation, we don't get redemption. It all comes in and through him. And so the whole book has been telling us about how, okay, Jesus is better than, and literally you can fill in anything from the Old Testament. So he is better than every covenant that was ever given. And, a covenant was just a relational contract of some sort with God and how he was going to deal with his people. And there was lots of them, quite a few of them. And so he's better than all of those. He's better than Moses, who Moses is like the man in the Old Testament because he receives the commands of God for the people of God. So Jesus is better than Moses. He's better than angels. Angels are just mere messengers and workers of what God's doing. So Jesus is way better than that. He is the gospel. He's not just the messenger of the gospel. He's the good news. It's perpetual. He's better than every sacrifice you can ever have. It goes on and on and on and on about how he's just so much better. And, there's a couple reasons why I think this is important in the book, because if he's not better, there is a certain feeling that the people are having because they are finding an incredible amount of persecution in this time period. So if you go back and you look, you're seeing that Christians are really starting to be persecuted in Rome. They're starting to be tormented for their beliefs. And the question is he worth dying for? Like, that's really the question that they're asking. Like, if we hold on to him, are we going to make it? I think we talked about this a couple times, but the Jewish religion, Judaism, they had found a niche within the Roman Empire that they could function and exist, and they could live in all the ways that they would live, and Rome was totally fine with it because of money and tribute. The Jewish community always created a lot of money. They could always pay Romans to leave them alone, to let them worship that they wanted. And Rome was like, worship whoever you want, as long as you give us the money. Sound familiar? And so the Christians, though, were very different. In fact, they were so different that some of the early writers were saying that Christianity almost seemed like a different race of people, that they weren't like the Romans and they weren't like the Jewish people. They were their own thing, which is really interesting because in Rome, the republic is everything, the government, the democracy, it's all the rule of the Caesar. And then the Jews are over here and they're like, we're going to live in this little way, but we're going to live within this kingdom and kind of follow what they're saying as long as it doesn't disrupt too much. And then the Christians are like, we're actually not going to live either way. We're going to live completely different. And everyone's like confused because these people were giving up their money to live together as Christians. It literally says that in those time periods that these people, they gave everything they had to each other. And they're like, this is crazy. And they were all about life. So they always took in widows. They always took in orphans. That's what they believed was the core of their whole experience is like, we're not about money. We're not about our own traditions. We are about life. And that was like their big push. And so they created, some scholars call it the third way, which I think is a beautiful phrase to think about this, is that we as Christians are following a third way in the world. There's always kind of this way and that way. And Jesus is like, or there's my way. And he does this again and again and again. And I think it's particularly beautiful because I feel like it's salient to the region that we live in, that we have a lot of people who live on one way, another in another way, maybe political, maybe socioeconomical. And Jesus is like, I want you to live a completely different way. And the way, and I think this is really important, that the way that Jesus is showing us is always one that is tied and connected to life. And this is so important. And we even talked about this. Gina Green did such a magnificent job. Oh my goodness. She's one of my favorite teachers. But she was talking about how, I was alluding to it a couple weeks before that, but you can't just follow this thing called Christianity and say like, yeah, we're right and everybody else is wrong. Like that's actually the wrong mindset to have. It's we're for life, period. And that is the mindset to have. And every other way is not life. And you can live in your rightness or your rightness, and that's fine, but Jesus is asking us to follow life. And part of the reason that we talked about this is because when Jesus comes, he's showing us the picture of what does it mean to live in right relationship with God. And so we're kind of getting back to the Garden of Eden where God started everything and he built relationship into all of the universe, humans, God, in creation, all functioning in an interrelated relationship. And if you're in an interrelated relationship, it's less about the rightness and the wrongness and more about the relationship. And this is really important because the relationship is where the life is. And so we talked about how, if you go to another country, their version of what is right and wrong might be different than what our version of right and wrong is. So you can't judge on that picture. You have to come back to, is there life? Is there life on it? And so Gina did a great job. She really opened this picture up where she was like, there's the old covenant and the new covenant, and there's the old man and the new man, and there's kind of this depiction of either you're going to follow yourself and your ways, or you're going to follow Jesus and his ways. And so we get to 10 with all of that in the background, and from like verse 1 all the way to 16, basically it's like everything I already said, again. It's all a reiteration of everything from like chapter 7 on. It's just like, hey, I love this picture. This is just a shadow of the actual form, which is super beautiful to realize. It made me think of C.S. Lewis when he talks about how Narnia, which is this picture of kind of a beautiful, wonderful space that these children escape to, that they think they're going into like the future of like heaven in some ways for them, and they realize that what Narnia was just a shadow of the real Narnia. And that's in some ways exactly the same picture that Jesus is showing them in the book of Hebrews. Is like everything you thought was amazing and great is just a shadow of how great it actually is when you're with me in it. And so basically he's like, shadow, true form. And he highlights a couple passages. There's literally tons of little nugget passages from the First Testament. And then he ends by saying that everything is taken care of perpetually because Jesus died once and for all. And I think that this is really powerful language. There was a whole theology that was built called the finished work of Jesus. That if he died and he gave everything up, nothing else ever has to be given ever again, because he died once and for all. He's not dying all the time. He died once, it's done, it's forever, and it's covering all of us for all eternity. And so that verse 10 says that, and then he unpacks a little bit, or she, because we don't know if it was a male or female who wrote this. He unpacks like this whole idea of like we don't have to make perpetual offerings anymore. We don't have to make sacrifices anymore. We don't have to do all these things. And then he comes to 17, which I think is like a huge pivot, not just in this section, but in the whole book. In verse 17, he's quoting from the First Testament. He says, "I will remember their sins and their lawless deeds no more." And in verse 18 says, "Where there is forgiveness of these, there is no longer any offering for sin." So, all of that to say that all of these things from the First Testament, Jesus is showing he's better, he's better, he's better, he's better, he's better. And then he makes this statement of, "I will not remember all the things that have been done wrong. And I will not remember any of the things that were out of the way that I wanted them to be, because I have brought forgiveness." So, as we normally do on Wednesday nights, I'd love for you to get into a group with one or two other people, and I want us to just ask the simple question, what is forgiveness? Why is this kind of the stamp on the argument? That he's better than everything. What is forgiveness? So I'm going to give you guys about 7 minutes to get with a few other people around you, and then we're going to answer this together, and then I'm going to give you a bunch of crazy information about forgiveness, okay? Ready, set, break. am super curious about some of the words that come to your mind when you hear the word forgiveness. All right. Anyone in the back? Anyone in the back? Yes, Allie. What? Active? Forgiveness is active. Okay. Over here somewhere? Pardoning. Okay. Cleansing. Merciful justice. Clean slate. Tabula rasa. Do you guys know what that is? Tabula rasa. It's crazy Latin. Sorry. For clean slate. Means like, I'm sorry. This is what happens to me, friends. All these nerdy things come into my brain and I just say them. I'm sorry, you were saying? Clean slate. Standing? Like you're, okay, yeah, like you're standing. Okay. Anyone else? Don't be afraid. It's okay. There's no wrong answers. Giving up your rights. I like that. I like all of them, really. Let's be honest. So this word forgiveness is a really interesting word. Aphesis is the way we say it in English. This is the nerdy Greek. It comes from the word aphiemi. And the thing that's so interesting about this to me is that I never went there in my brain at what this actually looks like, because a lot of your words are right. There's words in here like release, like that forgiveness is a release, which I think is a really powerful word. A lot of times it's a release from bondage or imprisonment, or even slavery. I think is interesting. There's also the sense that the word remittance is sometimes in here as well. But if you strip it, because I'm always about stripping the words down so we know what we're talking about, and it's really about letting go. That's really the picture. That when I forgive you, I'm letting you go. And when you let someone go, I think this is really interesting. This word, it comes from this word. This is the root of this word. And it means to send away intensely or intensively. And so there's something really beautiful about this moment, because as you're thinking about all these things that have come up about Jesus is better and he's so much more, and he's better than sacrifice, he's better than priesthood, he's better than everything. He's just better than everything. It comes to this moment where he just says, where there is the forgiveness, there is no longer any more offerings. And I think that word is so interesting. There's no offerings. Here's the Greek word again, prosphero. Is the word. And one of the things that I found was really interesting about this idea of prospero is that it means to lead or to bear towards. And so there's a lot of interesting movement pictures here that you have, because you have forgiveness, this letting go, this sending away intensively. There's no offerings. There's nothing that's leading you or bearing you towards. We're really talking about a change of direction. That when you are forgiven, when you live a life of forgiveness, there is a change in the direction of how you orient your whole existence. And so the question is, what is the orientation? What is the orientation to this whole thing? And I think it's really amazing to think about this, because as we've been talking about Hebrews, what we've been talking about is that Hebrews is really about us learning to be followers of the promise. that our whole existence as Christians is to follow the promise. What's the promise? What's the orientation? It's the same question. What is that? And I think that what we find is we get the very next section beginning to unpack that when you're following Jesus, when you're orienting your life around Jesus, that you're not leading towards any sort of offering. There is no good work that can possibly take you far enough. There's no amount of effort. There's no amount of trying. There's no amount of good ability that's going to ever get you anywhere. But when you live forgiven, you are freed and let go of everything. You are let go of every responsibility you've ever felt in your whole existence. You are freed from every single bearing weight on your life. It's bare. Like, you're not having to bear anything anymore. You're not having to carry anything anymore. You're not having to try anymore. The new orientation, this forgiveness, is forgiving you freedom. It's forgiving you space. It's forgiving you a lightness, a relief. It's forgiving you goodness. It's forgiving you something. So the question is are we receiving that something? Are we receiving that forgiving that the Son has provided because he has dealt with sin? He's dealt with, what is sin? Anything that keeps you from connection with God. So he's dealing with all that, and he's going, you don't have to try to get back to me. You don't have to try to figure out me. You don't have to get to me. It's already there. It's already open. This goes, Matt Johnson's talking about, you're in the ocean already. You can't not be in the ocean. You're wearing the jacket, and we're already there. And Gina talked about this, that when we're living by the law of life and not the law of good and evil, because what does good and evil, the law of good and evil, put on us? But we have to have offerings. We have to do the right thing, right? But if we're living in the law of life, we don't have to do the right thing. We have to find the life, which is the Son, and just do what the Son does. Or join him in it, which is even easier. There's no pressure, no offering, no bearing on us. It's all freeing, forgiving, releasing. This changes us. It changes us when we start living every day and our mindset is releasing and not withholding. It changes everything when we think we have to take control to fix something and we let go of control instead. Try it. It's funny, I was recently telling, we just brought on some residents and some interns, to bolster our team since Pastor Jordan left. And I was telling them, I'm like, if you feel like you should do something, you shouldn't. Because shoulding is going back to this way of offering. I always tell somebody, if I feel like I should help somebody, I refer them to someone else. That's my modus operandi. If I can figure out that I'm like, oh, I should do that. That would be a good thing for me. I should do that. I won't do it. I just adopted this in the last few years. It's changing me. It's freeing me. It's releasing me. I'm not being irresponsible, for the record. What I'm doing is I'm looking for life, and I'm not looking to try to work my way to get there.
Religion putting a burden on you, but not the Spirit.
I think that this is humanity. This is what we do naturally without God. I don't think it's just religion. I think scientists do it. I think psychologists do it. I think humanity makes us move towards work to get anything rather than releasing to receive everything.
So it's demands of wherever.
Yes, sir. It's all sorts of demands.
How do you deal, like I asked her last week, with this sin culture? What do you do with guilt and shame? Because it seems to me, in this paradigm, we're not sinners. We may sin,
Right.
but the sin nature is gone, and the Spirit has us confess sins. That's fine, but we don't go
Yeah,
in this system.
and I think that we find out actually in the next section a little bit more about that guilt and that shame part. Because guilt and shame in their essence are not wrong. They're only wrong when they start forcing you to do things to get out of guilt and get out of shame. The only thing that guilt and shame should ever do is point you back to that you don't have life in that area yet. That's it. If I get shamed about something that happens with me, it just means I need to go back to the one, the Son, who has life so that he can forgive me. Because my mind hasn't caught up with the reality that he's already created for me. And so that's all it is. Guilt, shame. To be honest with you, any emotion that you have is just leading you and guiding you back to say, where's the life? Or where's the life not yet? Am I falling under this offering, this burden, this bearing? Or am I finding there's so much that's been sent away? There's so much freedom. There's so much releasing that happens when I live in relationship with the Son, who is the way, the truth, and the life. That changes everything. And I live in the law of life and liberty and not in the law of sin, death, and work. Okay?
So could you say that when we confess our sins, we're actually, you could change that to realizing I'm not there yet.
Yeah, sure.
I need you in this area.
Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit 2 weeks ago because the word confession means to say the same thing. So the Son, what is he saying about every single one of us? You are forgiven. My confession is that I don't think that I'm forgiven yet. So yeah, I might still have areas in my life that I still need to confess because I just haven't I haven't found this sending away, this freeing, this remit, all these beautiful words, releasing. I haven't found all of that yet. Confession is me learning to say what he's been saying since he took care of everything. That's why it's once and for all. He doesn't need that is the final word. Literally it says in the scriptures that his blood, his life, speaks a better word than everything else. And so we're learning to say the same words about who he's called us to be, who he's created us to be. And I've been really thinking about how if all of this goes all the way back, we talked about this the very first week, in chapter 1 of Hebrews, there's these crazy allusions to the creation picture in Genesis, where the Lord speaks by his Son. Just like in the beginning, it says that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, that we also know the Word was in the beginning with God when he created. Jesus is always considered the Word. And so when God speaks and says, let there be life, the Lord has always been speaking his Son. He's always been speaking that. And so we're all trying to come into agreement and alignment with that is the Word. Jesus is the Word. He is the only Word that we all need to confess. And when we confess that, that's how we find salvation. So once we realize this orientation is changing, there is a certain response. Verse 19, therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence. I wrote the word up here, parousia. Can I just tell you, this is so beautiful. This is the freedom, literally, the idea of confidence, parousia in this word, is the freedom when someone is in a new relationship. Think about the moment when you first met that special somebody, or the first time you met your best friend. There is a freedom that is in a new relationship. That with Jesus, it stays forever and ever. And this is our confidence. Our confidence is that because we have relationship, we are free to live. We're not free to be burdened and bear under these things. We're free to be free. We're free to be released. We're free to live in an existence that is not incumbent on me. I get to join the Son in what he's doing. I get to participate, but I don't have to do the stuff myself. That changes our game. It changes our life. And so he says, since we have this amazing freedom, he's like, enter the sanctuary. So in this picture, we've taught, we talked about this a little bit. Judah talked about it too. So in the ancient Near Eastern world, they're thinking about this thing. There's this like whole sphere that they believe exists, this realm of heaven, and then there's this whole sphere of earth. And in the scriptures particularly, in heaven, there's like a giant throne, little throne action right here. And the footstool is, well, it's a little closer to the earth really, is this earth. And so, there's the king, and he sits up here, and he props his feet up in the earth. But in the ancient Near Eastern world, where the king was, this heavenly place, this is, the courtroom kind of picture, the king's court, throne room, however you want to talk about it. And then the earth is his footstool, but it's even more beautiful because in the ancient Eastern world, every throne room looks over a garden. And so that's the picture. And so we're talking about, hey, you have this confidence now that there is way more overlap now because he died. He made a way, is what we found in Hebrews, that we can come and experience a closer connection to God, more than we've ever had just in our everyday reality. And we have confidence to say, we can go there. We can be with God. We can connect with God. We can interact with him. And I love it because it calls this pathway, it's a new way. In the text, it says that we can enter into the sanctuary by the new and living way that he opened up through his flesh, through his body. And so I think that for us, it's really fascinating for us to begin to think about this, because this new and this living way is like, there's a play on this. And first, there's the new covenant. So we're getting these allusions back to, there's this new way of relationship that he's not going to make you do things on the outside. He wants you to be led by your heart, be led by it says he put his law in our hearts in this new covenant. It's not what we're doing, it's that we're freed from all this so that we can follow in our orientation the new way, the life. And then the second word here, way, this is literally in the book of Acts, when the church first starts, that's what they call Christians. They call them the way. And so there's this direct picture, this direct connection to saying, hey, listen, this is the path. It's through your confidence that you've been forgiven, that when you have this, there is nothing unavailable in the realms of the king. There's nothing unavailable in your connection with God. All the peace you want, all the love you want, all the joy you need, it's all there if you can have confidence in his forgiveness, that he has dealt with every possible thing wrong and has made everything right. And this brings us to such a just rest in my mind, which is Hebrews talks about this all the time. It brings us to a rest not of what? Not a rest of vacating, not a rest of brunch on Sunday morning and sleeping in, but a rest that brings an engagement into the world that we didn't have before. Because if I'm actually oriented and freed by life, then life is teeming everywhere. You know this because children get it. They operate in this way, in a crazy level, where they live in this way of life. They walk around and they just see everything that's alive. Mommy, did you see that flower right there? You're like, there's a bunch of rocks. And then they will reach down and it will be like the tiniest pink flower and be like, look at how lovely it is. And you're like, I never saw it because I'm too busy. I'm too hard on myself to get things done and accomplish things because I'm not confident in who I am, and because I don't believe that I've been forgiven of all the shiitake that I've been living in. This is really the truth. And so once this happens, where I'm opening my mind to the reality that life is what it's all about, I start seeing life everywhere. And I'm identifying life because I'm identifying that he is doing all of this. He's weaving the universe together, and he always has. And he's inviting me to join him. Come along. Come follow. Come see. It's like my favorite thing that Jesus says, come and see. He always says that. Come and see. And I'm like, this is what he's saying. Hey, come see what it's like when heaven and earth are coexisting the way I made it at the very beginning. I never wanted it to be separate. I always wanted us to have the full realm and the full reality of everything that God has for us. And so I love it because he's like, all right, well, we have a great high priest in the house of God. Now we're like in family. This is great. He then goes into a beautiful little section where he gives us 3 little exhortations, or she. There is a lot of scholarship out there right now that has really been questioning if a female wrote Hebrews, and I find it so fascinating because this book is non-linear in certain ways that I think that's wired the beauty of how God made women, and that just gives me joy. I am so pro-women, like reading and preaching the Bible. Like I can't even, my mom, like 1994, it was like one of the most marking memories I've ever had of seeing her get ordained and see her like start preaching in the church, and it just shook me. I was like, oh, my mama, she's a way better preacher than my dad too, like legit. Like everyone's like, is it the 3rd week when mom, Pastor Kathy, at my parents' church, it really is like that. They love dad, but she's just a fireball, and she just brings it. And so it's this beautiful question of like, okay, because of all this, because of your orientation, what do you do? And I always love it. It's the let us. That's how you know. Anytime you see the let us, it's trying to encourage us that we're more than salad here, that we're let us do this. And so he says, first, let us approach. This is in verse 22. Let us approach with a true heart and full assurance of faith. Now, I want to just highlight this for a second. Faith has not really been talked about a lot in this book. It's sprinkle. Most of us are wired that Hebrews is about faith because we're going to see in chapter 11 it's all about faith. But I want you to notice that you approach in a true heart and full assurance of faith. And this is what I was saying with money earlier, with our hearts sprinkled clean from that evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. There's a baptismal picture, there's a cleansing, there's, a rinsing, a releasing. There's all of this picture that's happening because we're trying to come with a true heart. So my encouragement to all of us as we're trying to figure this out is like, listen, if you don't know how to figure out how to be forgiven yet, like just come with like a real heart. Like just come honest. Like, Jesus, I don't know how to do this. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea how many things I'm maybe bearing under or I'm being led by that are towards something that's not the way in the life. I'm going to just come with a true heart. And I'm like, man, and I know right now it's like super popular to be like, yeah, don't follow your heart. It looks so bad. And I'm like, no. You just come with your heart. And you let Jesus deal with your heart. It's not my job to tell you if your heart's good or bad. That's him. I'm trying to come to the place of life that says just bring your heart however it is. See what happens. Stop trying to be like, my heart's good or bad. Like noise, static. You're missing the life. He is the life. He's the only one who can tell us about our hearts. And I want to come into alignment with that. Because according to the scriptures, he came that my heart would be fleshy and soft, not stony. So it's clear to me that that's the covenant. That's the promise, is that I can come with a soft, ready, supple heart, ready to respond to him, and not hard and grouchy and bearing and calloused and working and exhausted. So he says, 2, let us hold fast. So approach, let us hold fast. Now, so interesting. So I mentioned before that confession word means to say the same thing as. So he says, hold fast to the confession, same word, to say the same words, of our, and I love this, of our hope without wavering. For he who has promised is faithful. I'm going to get on my box for a quick second, a little soapbox. So many people want to talk about, you need to hold fast to your confession of your faith and what you believe in and what you're all about. And I'm reading this and I'm like, no, you hold fast to the one who has promised to be faithful. there's this really big issue that we think that it's about grasping all of these things, again, right or wrong. We're obsessed with knowledge. We're obsessed with good and evil, but we're not obsessed with life. And we know this. We know this because we look at the world and we see injustices and we try to say, well, that's right and that's wrong. And I'm like, it's life. Like, whoever doesn't have life, it is not just. Period. Exclamations, Can we follow the life? Jesus is the life. He's the truth. He's embodiment of good and beautiful and lovely. And follow him instead of your opinion, your version of all this stuff. Hold fast to the confession of our hope, for he who is promised is faithful. Love that. And then thirdly, our response to this orientation, we're approaching, so we're running in here. Then we're like grabbing a hold, Don't let go of this reality. There's like lots of Old Testament pictures, by the way. One of my favorite pictures is there's a picture where you can go and grab a hold of the ark to beseech mercy. Because that's the whole point, is that you need mercy for any of this to work. We'll get to that in maybe a second. Number 3, he says, let us consider how to provoke each other. Not provocations of bad things, but he's like, can we provoke each other to love and good deeds? Now, notice, this is not bearing and working, loving good deeds. It's not this, because this is all under forgiveness and all under confidence and in this space. What we find out is that this provoking to love and good deeds is a provocation to mercy. What does mercy say? Mercy says life every time. This might disrupt your politics a little bit, but mercy says it's life every time. Go and you think, all the versions and places in the scriptures, that it is mercy that triumphs over judgment. It's literally what the scripture says. So then you have to recognize whatever judgment you have is less than mercy is. This is the way. The top of the Ark of the Covenant, which is where God's presence is, the mercy seat. What do you think this throne is but a mercy seat? What happens when you beseech mercy is you experience forgiveness and a releasing. No one who experiences mercy walks away going, oh, I feel so heavy because you gave me mercy. Doesn't this change it for you, though? That if you can, listen, I'm not saying, mercy is not weak, by the way. Mercy whoops tail. Mercy is amazing. Mercy comes on the scene and says, I can pull you out, I can rescue you, and I can let you go. That's powerful. And I think for us, we're so condemning, we're so judging towards ourselves, primarily, plus the rest of the world. Anytime somebody's judging everyone else, I'm like, yeah, there's a judger inside of you about 75 times worse than what you're judging everything else. But what happens when you get a little bit of mercy inside is it magnitudes to everybody else. When you experience his mercy, mercy becomes so normal because it's a flow of life. That when you experience the flow of life and mercy to you, you experience everyone feels the flow of mercy or grace or love, however you want to talk about it. It doesn't matter. It's life. And you want it. And everybody else wants it too. And everyone else who says they don't want it is lying. Because they actually want this. And they will try to pay for it. They will try to work for it. They will try to cajole every other human in the universe. They will swindle and lie to get life. And it's not something to be gotten. It's something to be received. Let's hold fast to the confession. Let's consider how to provoke each other to love and good deeds. And listen, I just love verse 25. This is like a pastor's favorite verse. Not neglecting to meet together, as is in the habit of some, but encouraging one another. I love this. This is like pastor shade for people who skip church on Sundays. Not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, And all the more as you see the day approaching. Now, I just want to highlight this because I think this is so beautiful. Because I don't think we always get there, like in our brains, because we're so used to like, again, this condemnation thing that's like, oh, you're batty, you should have done that. But this picture of coming together, like as a church, why is it so important? It's so important because it's supposed to be a mini model of this picture right here. In fact, if you go study architecture in the church, for years and years and years, they called this space the sanctuary. Why? Because it is the place where people can come in and experience mercy, love, and grace. So if we don't have that space in a big corporate space way, then when people come in, they won't experience that grace. Now, listen, they might meet you and experience a little grace and a little mercy, and you're like, oh, that's special. But when we come together, this picture gets bigger. It becomes more vibrant. It becomes more active and alive. And when we're all together, he can be seen immeasurably greater than just you in your own life. We kind of got individualistic a little bit in our Christianity. We're like, well, I am a temple. I'm like, yes, you are a temple, but the scripture also says that you are a stone of the temple. So how's that working out for you? Because I'm pretty sure that means that you need all the other stones to also be a temple. It's this combination reality that we're being invited into, that I actually need you to show up, because if you don't show up, we won't show the whole picture of forgiveness. Let me give you a simple, for instance. If I tell you that I have lived a ratchet sexual life, and you haven't, then you cannot possibly show the freedom that I have. Does that make sense? And maybe you're like, well, I'm a very proud person. I've had pride as my issue my whole life. And if, of course, the proud person will be like, my pride's better than yours. If I don't show you my forgiveness, then you also will miss out the picture of how much freedom there is. We need one another to see the expanse of the forgiveness and the mercy of God. And this is why we come together. Not just to come to church and not just to play and just to be like, oh, cool, it was like a good talk. Not that. It's so that every person who comes in, as they meet us, experiences a widening of the mercy of God and a widening of the forgiveness that Jesus offered once and for all. Because each one of us is a testimony or a witness to this act. Amen? It's good, right? You guys are a little quiet and sleepy on me tonight. It's fine. I'm working hard, 26 through 31 gets real scary real fast, okay? And it talks about how if we willfully persist in our sin, like bad stuff, like it's not good, judgment comes, it's like the Lord will judge his people. But let me just tell you this. I learned this last year when I was researching for the second hardest book we've ever done, which was when we did the Revelation series. That was not my favorite. But I started researching because I've always had this tension, because I'm so I know that part of my wiring is mercy. So sometimes judgment is not my favorite, but it says right here that the Lord will judge his people in verse 30. But I had this moment where I felt like I really caught a hold of something, and I'm not going to lie, since I caught a hold of this, it showed up in every resource I've used. That the judgment of God is to deal with anything that will prevent you from having relationship with him. That is the judgment of God. It is to remove and deal with anything that would hinder or prevent you from having right relationship. If you hold on to that thing so hard, like we hold fast to him, if you're holding fast to this thing, you might just get blown up. Not because he wants that to happen to you, but because he's got to remove that. And if you're holding on to it, it's like you're holding a bomb, and he's like, I have to press the button because we can't have bombs in the world. You're going to experience something that feels wrathful and intense and terrifying. but it's not for you. Forgiveness is for you. Freedom and releasing is for you. But if you hold on to it, it's a time bomb. It's ticking. If you go and you read, it talks about in Scripture that in James chapter 1, that sin, when it comes in, the disconnection with God, if you let it remain, it ends up turning to death. It's just the nature of how sin operates. It will always push you back to offerings, barrens, the opposite of life and opposite of finding the way. You will be lost and in death if you're living with this place of sin, where you have not found forgiveness, you have not found freedom because you're following him and not your own ways. Most of our sin is just us following our own way and not following his way. And so he's like, hey, I just want you to know, you can persist in this, but it's not good news for you. It's a warning. So don't do that. That's what this section is for. It's not to be scary. It's like, please don't do this. And one of the things that he says in here is he's like, don't look at what he did for us, his sacrifice, and make it nothing. Because it was something. You know, we don't want to like downplay what he did for us. And when we persist in it, notice, if you have sin in your life, it's okay. Don't persist. That's the key word. Willfully persist. Don't keep intentionally doing it. That's when you get to the point where like it starts reaping death and you're like, whoa, what am I going to do? We want to find life and we want to follow after it. Verse 32. But recall those earlier days after you've been enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings. So this is the second part of this forgiveness piece. So we talked about forgiveness and all these things that happen, your freedom and release, and it's important because we're getting to this releasing picture because all of what we've talked about is primarily what? Internal. But now it comes out and it's now beginning to be external. And he's like, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to insults and afflictions. And I want to stop there for a second. Once you start being a witness to the forgiveness that God has given, you have to then not just have the forgiveness, but you have to begin to have forbearance. Or some people would say perseverance, or some people would say endurance, however you want to think about it. But what happens here is actually really heartbreaking. These words here are connected directly to persecution every single time. Now, I know that we're terrified of the word persecution. We're like, oh my gosh, Jason, why are you talking about persecution? That sounds like the worst thing ever. But what we find is that persecution so quickly helps us realize how much freedom we actually have. Because if somebody is doing these horrific things, like it says, I mean, I could unpack the word suffering, the word publicly exposed, the word afflictions. All of these things are extremely intense. They have really, really like painful realities. One has to do with your loss of your position in a public way. Like nobody wants that. Like that sounds terrible. One of the other words is that you would be put as a public spectacle for everybody to laugh at. Like, it's pretty intense. Like, and you're like, oh my gosh, like these are so hardcore. One even goes so far to say like it's borderline that you're in a position where people are abusing you. Like that is the persecution that happens when you begin to live this forgiveness life, because the whole world that's not living in life is going to try to come in opposition to life. Not because they're trying to, but because they've been sowing into a different reality. And it's just grown up. It's just responded. And so we want to really make sure that we're in this thing together, in this forbearing, this ability that we can have to come into the place for a better perspective. Because that's what persecution does, is it starts to help us realize that actually persecution only can happen in a terrestrial, earthly space. But persecution does not happen when I'm with God. It doesn't matter what's going on around me. One of my favorite pictures, you can look this up, it's St. Anthony facing the demons, I think is what it's called. And there's this crazy monk that was living in the desert and trying to get really close with God. And there's this beautiful, crazy, weird piece of art. And he's sitting there and he's just like chill, like ultra chill. Like eyes closed, at perfect repose. And there's like hundreds of like demon-y things all on top of him. And the story is that they were like, brother, did you not realize that like hundreds of demons were like all over you? And he goes, I didn't notice anything. Because that persecution, his perspective was not there. Because he was so obsessed with living from this place of forgiveness and life that nothing could even affect him. I mean, I'm telling you what, if we could live like people like that, whew, the whole world might come this way, you know? Like, they'd be like, what is that? Like, how are you immoved? How are you always abounding? And it's because you have a different perspective. You're living in freedom. You're living in forgiveness. You're living in all of this, and you're not living under the burdens of this world. So powerful. And then I love this because he's like, hey, you became partners with this. It means that you've decided, this word partner means that you've made it common. You've made it common to come next to other people who are going through it. So you don't go, oh man, Nick is getting harassed. I'm going to stay away so I don't get harassed. You're like, no, actually I'm going to go over and stand next to Nick as long as I need to stand next to him until the harassment's done. Oh, that's a different way. And then it's funny because he literally describes what it looks like. For you had, verse 34, for you had compassion for those who were in prison with you. Persecution took them to prison. The word compassion here is a unique word that means that you have the same feelings and experiences with them. That there's a with feeling, a with experience. In the Greek, it literally it's not just you feel something, it's that you feel it with. Like there's a beautiful little little three-letter word that's thrown onto a word to say it's like a super witness. And I'm like, all of a sudden, your witness is this witness in the earth. And I'm telling you, there's something about this in this season for all of us, and I've noticed it, that when you really come alongside and you're with somebody, everybody else starts taking note of that witness. And it becomes this testimony, this witness to something that everyone's not used to seeing. Because most people run when there's difficulty. You know, they say that right now, if you want to know who the best leader is in this room, somebody would set off the fire alarm and see the person who is the most non-anxious. That would be the greatest leader in the room. And you're sitting here like the person who's willing to sit in the middle of the situation and show everybody the way out, not the person yelling, screaming, and trying to escape. We love to escape in our mindset and our approach to the universe and the world. And the Lord is saying to us, it's actually about you entering in. Why? Because his forgiveness that he offered through his death was him entering into our humanity, living like us, experiencing like us, and giving his life so that we could live. And then we get to model that life to the world. Thank God we don't have to die again. Once and for all, he died. We don't have to die. But we do have to die to anything that would not be freeing. We do have to die of anything that would enslave us and bond us and hold us back. We do have to die to anything that says, I don't want to stay next to somebody who's being afflicted. We do have to die to that. And so when we do that, all of a sudden we realize, as it goes on to say, you cheerfully accepted the plundering of your possessions. Like you're joyful about them taking everything from you. That talk about a perspective shift. And then he says, knowing that you yourselves possess something better and more lasting. What a mindset shift. That his way and his life is so much better than anything you would even materially have. Do not therefore abandon your boldness, your parousia. Don't abandon this freedom you have in the relationship with me, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive, again, what is promised. This whole reality of heaven and earth and it being in one space, that is the promise, the perfect connection with God forever and ever. For yet in a little while, the one who is coming will come and will not delay. What good news that is, that his advent, his arrival is near. And it says in verse 38, but my righteous one will live by faith. My soul takes no pleasure in anyone who shrinks back. But we are not among those who shrink back, and so are lost, but among those who have faith, and so preserve our souls. We end this chapter with this beautiful little nudge that if you have forgiveness and you have forbearance, these things begin to yield faith. Now, What is faith? Spoiler, you got to come next week. Because we're going to talk about faith and what is the true nature of faith and what it really looks like to have faith. Because the truth is that what we think faith is, it's not what you think. And it's vastly more beautiful and vastly more different and way more connected to life than you having any sort of ability or confession and what you think. Let me pray for you guys as we go. Hey, Jesus, would you help us? This sounds beautiful and lovely, but when push comes to shove, most of us run. We don't move towards the difficulty. Most of us prefer to be tied up and stuck because it's easier than actually letting you come and bring freedom and release us from all things. Would you come and release every heart tonight of all of the energies and efforts and works and burdens and bearings and offerings that they feel like they have to have? And would you instead give them the confidence and the hope and the boldness to know that you've already done it all, so we can have connection and access to you in every way possible? Would you allow us to be those that come alongside of others, that show mercy and compassion and witness? And Lord, let our witness be seen in the earth, that there is no one like you who forgives all sin and all laws that were broken. We're so grateful that you freed us. Lord, let us not see our freedom as just an opportunity to do nothing, but Lord, let our freedom be an opportunity for us to also forgive others and to forbear with others and to find faith in you being the faithful one and us being faithful like you. Jesus, we just ask that you would just show us all the areas that need more releasing, and show us all the areas of how we can lean in to forbearing. We ask all of these things in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, you guys, we'll see you hopefully next week as we get into faith. And, see you Sunday. See you Sunday. We're starting Advent on Sunday. You should text the word Advent into the church number, and you'll get a little mini devotion every day about Advent. And Advent's all about the coming of Jesus the first time, and it also preps our hearts for the coming of Jesus a second time, which is what we believe. And man, Advent's one of my favorite seasons in the whole Christian calendar, and I hope that you will text the word Advent, A-D-V-E-N-T, into the church number. Follow along with us. I promise you it's going to be fun. There's lots of cool activities that are part of our journey through Advent, which is called The Seed of Advent, Praying Through the Winter. And so that's what the whole Advent series is about that we start on Sunday. We'll be looking at 4 specific prayers that happen in the Advent stories, and how we can align our hearts to those kinds of prayers in this season. Have a good night.